Thiago Alcantara today has announced his retirement. I will always be willing to give back what I have been given, and I'm grateful for the time I've enjoyed it. Thank you, football, and to all who accompanied me and made me a better player in person along the way. See you soon, Thiago. And we got a few pictures as well to go along with it. Thiago with his brother here, Rafinha. This was a nice story as well too, right? I think like playing with your brother at your boyhood football club, that's got to be like the dream, man. So that was sick. This is an iconic campaign. I think it was the Spain under-21 team with Thiago, with Isco. I think Italy had Verratti those days. This team was crazy, bro. I think Thiago scored a hat-trick in the final, so that's another highlight of his career. This right here is one of the most iconic pictures of the last decade, in my opinion. Thiago obviously winning the Champions League in 1920. For me, he was one of the best players in that entire campaign. Obviously, Lewandowski did his thing, went crazy, but Thiago was so slept on for Bayern in that campaign. And I actually believe since he left, they have never replaced him, in my opinion. I don't think they ever managed to replace Thiago Alcantara in that midfield. And then finally, maybe one of the best goals he's ever scored in his career, man. That half volley against Porto. The technique, man. The technique was just an absolute joke. But let's talk about Thiago, man. For me, one of the most talented, like technically gifted midfielders I've ever seen. Not even of his generation, but since I've been watching the game, Thiago is one of the most technically gifted footballers I have ever seen. Honestly, the first touch, the passing, the manipulation, the feints, a cerebral midfield talent. Honestly, I don't think I can underestimate or like undervalue how brilliant the guy was with the ball at his feet enough. So talented. What he did at Barcelona was brilliant, right? I mean, I say brilliant. It was good. And we got like signs of what Thiago was capable of doing in some cameos at the time. And yeah, I think everybody, right, who was a Barcelona fan at the time kind of believed that Thiago was destined to be the heir to Xavi. And I'll tell you what, right? I think when Fabregas came to Barcelona in, 2011, I actually think part of the reason why Fabregas didn't really go crazy at Barca the way everyone kind of thought he would was because you had a guy in Thiago who was probably more adept at playing the Xavi role than Fabregas was, which is crazy to say, but Thiago was just so smooth, man, honestly. The understanding of time, the understanding of tempo, the ability to kind of manipulate his way again out of these tight situations. Like, he was really a Barca midfielder through and through. And I understand Fabregas was kind of developed in La Masia. That's where he kind of made his name and eventually went to Arsenal. But I think what people fail to understand is when he came to Arsenal, he spent the early years of his career there. And I actually think his footballing education, yes, it was born in La Masia, but it was shaped and molded at Arsenal in the Premier League. And I'm not here to say that he was like Gerrard, for example, like Blood and Thunder and stuff like that. But the way Fabregas' game was very direct. He liked passing forwards, like he's just mentioned recently. Everything was direct, 1 touch, 2 touch, 3 touch, shots from distance. Brilliant midfielder. Fabregas was my first favorite ever player as a kid. But for Barcelona, especially the way they were trying to play there, they appreciated more of like a more thoughtful, more slower, more patient approach to things. And in that sense, I actually thought that Thiago was more of a Barca player at the time and more of a natural Xavi replacement than Fabregas was. But obviously, right, I just don't think he was ever going to get the playing time he really deserved. And I think that summer of 2013-14, where first of all, United were heavily interested in him. And I think it was David Moyes who decided to go in a different direction, which looking back on it now is such a big L. But he ends up going to Bayern Munich and wow. Sensational. Thiago, Xabi Alonso, and Arturo Vidal, one of the best midfield threes in Europe at the time. You really had everything. You had in Alonso, the deep-lying playmaker, passes from deep, those long-range spraying all across the pitch, just the controller from deep. You had Arturo Vidal, who is like the ultimate box-to-box dual-winning midfielder. Aggression, energy, strikes on goal, tackles, carrying the ball forward. And then Thiago, you had the perfect balancer for me, right? Brilliant at controlling a game, brilliant at carrying the ball forward, always looking forward, always splitting passes, just kind of like the silk to Alonso's control and Vidal's steel. It was a beautiful midfield to kind of witness, bro. The thing with Thiago, right? There's 2 things that for me are a shame for his career. The injuries are the first part. Thiago, man, the amount of times that his seasons would be cut short or be stop-start because of the amount of injuries that he kind of suffered was an absolute shame. Honestly, I don't think he completed more than 30 games in a league season much. Honestly, I don't think he did it quite often. And the other thing I think he was quite unlucky in was at the time how dominant Real Madrid were. And even before that, how brilliant Barcelona were. Because that Bayern Munich team in general, right? I always thought, wow, they were so close to making history in Europe. but they just came up against teams like Real Madrid at that point, who were obviously just dominating Europe. Atletico Madrid as well, too, who were a terrific, difficult team to knock out of in knockout competition. You had the MSN Barcelona team. You even had Juventus, who I think Bayern knocked out, but Juventus were a tough team that, honestly, I look at the Champions League at that point, and I think it's one of the toughest pools of European teams that you have in the last 20 years. You had some tough teams. And I often say that winners, for me, dictate the way football is told, right? Like, the winners are how we remember players the best. And unfortunately, the fact that Bayern lost a lot of the times to Real Madrid makes us remember more Kroos, Modric, and Casemiro than we do Vidal and Thiago and those guys, right? Tolisso even, who I actually think was quite underrated for Bayern. But genuinely, I would urge you guys to go watch Bayern Munich back in those games, or even watch like individual compilations. Thiago Alcantara against Real Madrid in some of those games. Thiago against Atletico Madrid. Thiago against Juventus had games where he was running the show single-handedly. There were games where Thiago was the best midfielder on the pitch, sharing the pitch with Modric and Kroos. And it sounds ridiculous to say now because, like I said, the winners tell the story of football. But Thiago was that brilliant during games, man. And I'm so happy that 2019-20 was the year that they won the Champions League and they won the Sextuple. And you couldn't ignore Thiago. You couldn't ignore his contributions. That game against Chelsea in 2019-20 at Stamford Bridge was masterful. It was absolutely masterful. That performance against PSG in the final, absolutely masterful, man. Thiago was just an absolute wizard. Magician. One of the most gifted players with the ball at his feet. And again, I think the third thing that's kind of a shame for Thiago is that how much stock people kind of put once you come into the Premier League. Like the casual everyday Premier League fan had seen the Champions League 2019-20 season, but I think they were still a little unaware of how brilliant a player Thiago was when he joined Liverpool. And that second season, because I think the first one, again, he was injured on and off. I think at times he struggled really to adapt to the team that was often very injury prone. And I think at the end, Liverpool actually saved their 2021 season because they kind of paired Thiago and Fabinho, and they provided a terrific double pivot. But that next season, right, in 21-22, when they almost won the quadruple, Thiago was sensational, man. Thiago was absolutely brilliant. Oh, man. There were games, again, where he was running the show for Liverpool. Because you had a guy like Fabinho who's like good on the ball, right? He's underrated, Fabinho, on the ball, but he's a destroyer. You have a guy like Jordan Henderson next to him, who's kind of like the energy guy. You have the wide fullbacks. You have know how Liverpool play, blood and thunder, rock and roll. But then all of a sudden, you were to the rock and roll side of things. You were kind of adding a piano player. You were adding the conductor. You were adding a guy who liked the symphony music more than he liked the heavy metal. And it was like this beautiful blend at times. Like when it got right with Liverpool, Thiago being added to that recipe that was already there, it was the perfect mix. Honestly, Thiago had some games for Liverpool that season that it's just a joke, man. You had the game against Man City in the FA Cup semifinal. You had the game against United at Anfield when they beat us like 4-0. It was just stupid at times, bro. It was just absolute stupid at times.